Whew. Welcome. It is very good to see a live audience again. I was actually really nervous about this event, but not for what you think. I actually haven't worn a suit in 6 months, but I'm happy to report that it still fits. I'm Dan Smith, the director of the Political Economy Research Institute here at Middle Tennessee State University. The Political Economy Research Institute engages in research and educational programs which uncover the institutions and policies that encourage and enhance human well-being. We really appreciate you being with us for tonight's event. We hope you take the time to look up our upcoming events on our webpage. Our upcoming programming includes virtual lectures by Mayor Glenn Jacobs, formerly known as WWE Superstar Kane, giving a talk on being mayor of Knox County during COVID-19 on October 15th. Matt Ridley, on his new book, How Innovation Works and Why It Flourishes in Freedom, will be giving a talk on November 5th. We also partner with the Nashville Bassiat Society, which will host Brian Fitzpatrick, the Milton R. Underwood Chair in Free Enterprise at Vanderbilt University, and he will be giving a talk on Amy Coney Barrett's Supreme Court nomination and judicial outlook, and that will be on October 14th. One of our goals here at the Political Economy Research Institute is to restore the role of the Academy in promoting respectful and engaging intellectual dialogue on important issues in political economy, despite our divergent worldviews and backgrounds. That's why I'm so thrilled to be partnering with the Steamboat Institute to host tonight's debate on the wealth tax and higher income taxation between our distinguished guests. The Steamboat Institute actively works to promote civil discussions on college campuses. I want to welcome to the stage Jennifer Schubert-Akin. Jennifer is the chairman and CEO of the Steamboat Institute, an organization she co-founded with her husband Rick, who's also in attendance, in 2008. While the Steamboat Institute was founded in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, its programs are held on college campuses and in communities across America. Jennifer is a member of the advisory boards for the University of Colorado Benson Center for Western Civilization, Thought and Policy, and the Ed Snyder Center for Enterprise and Markets at the University of Maryland. She also serves on the board of directors of Rebecca's Angels, a nonprofit organization founded by Boston Marathon bombing survivor Rebecca Gregory. Jennifer is a graduate of the University of Oklahoma and received her MBA from St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas. In her free time, Jennifer enjoys competing in triathlons and trail running with her Alaskan Husky sled dog, Cruiser. She has completed 3 Leadville Trail 100-mile races, and in 2019, she completed her 25th consecutive Boston Marathon, earning membership in the Boston Marathon's exclusive Quarter Century Club. Making each mile count, Jennifer has raised $142,000 for the National MS Society along the way. Welcome to the stage, Jennifer.
Thank you, Dan. Well, good evening, Blue Raider country. It's nice to be in Tennessee. Thank you, Dan, for welcoming us to your beautiful campus and for the tour earlier. We truly enjoyed walking around campus. You know, up until just 2 weeks ago, we thought we were going to host this debate at the University of Denver. But due to COVID restrictions, we had to make a choice between either postponing our event to next year or moving it to another location. And since Dr. Laffer lives in Nashville, we reached out to our friends at the Beacon Center, and they put us in touch with Dan and the Political Economy Research Institute, and here we are. So thank you so much to Dan and your team here at Middle Tennessee State for making this possible. The Steamboat Institute has been educating and inspiring people on America's founding principles since 2008. Through our innovative programming and providing direct and personal access to leaders on the national and global stage, the Steamboat Institute hopes to inspire ordinary citizens, just people like all of us, to learn critical thinking skills and to use those skills to gain a better understanding of public policy, individual liberty, and the proper role of government. Our signature annual event is our Freedom Conference, which we hold each year in the Rocky Mountains out in Colorado. We have people all across America who travel to Colorado for our Freedom Conference weekend to meet and rub shoulders with our speakers who over the years have included Alan Dershowitz, Laura Ingraham, Dr. Ben Carson, Vice President Mike Pence, the administrator of NASA, Jim Bridenstine, Kim Strassel from the Wall Street Journal, just the list goes on and on. But while many organizations host policy conferences with speakers, we're pretty sure that our Freedom Conference is the only one to feature an outdoor dinner in the mountains with live music and a margarita party. So, for the students and young professionals who are here tonight or watching our live stream, we offer scholarships to attend the Freedom Conference each year. Each scholarship includes travel, lodging, and conference registration, plus the opportunity to meet and visit with our speakers. We have flyers here tonight, or if you're watching online, you can visit our website, steamboatinstitute.org, to get more information, and the scholarship applications will be available on our website beginning next April. Now, in 2018, the Steamboat Institute launched the Campus Liberty Debate Tour series to restore reasoned and respectful debate and civilized discourse to college campuses, something that I think all of us can acknowledge has been missing in recent years. Our first debate tour featured Nigel Farage and Vicente Fox debating nationalism versus globalism. We had audiences ranging from 500 to 1,000 people at CU Boulder, CU Colorado Springs, University of Maryland, Lafayette College, as well as live coverage on C-SPAN. It was a lot of fun. Our emphasis with the Campus Liberty Tour is on respectful and reasoned debate using critical thinking skills. Our focus is on teaching students and all who attend how to think, not what to think. Since that first tour, we've hosted many other debates on whether universities should regulate speech on campus, on socialism versus capitalism, and also on national popular vote versus electoral college. And now I'd like to show you just a 2-minute video with a few highlights from our Campus Liberty Tour debates.
Bring you this compelling discussion this evening.
People respond to incentives, and economics is all about incentive because it's just math. It's not left-wing, it's not right-wing, it's not Republican, it's not Democrat.
The fact is we're having a proper, full, honest, open debate, and boy, there are going to be differences. The Brexit vote.
Free speech. The migration.
National popular vote.
We are not fake news.
Without regulations, where a boss gets to decide who to employ, when to employ, on what conditions. We've seen this world too, and it hasn't worked.
Democracy doesn't turn a vice into a virtue magically. So rights cannot include using your fist.
It uses state boundaries like the watertight compartments on an ocean liner. You never have a nationwide recount, but you would under NPV.
The truth is in a national popular vote system, I am not afraid of my ideas.
If you don't have national sovereignty, then you're governed by someone else.
Progress. It's absolutely incredible what has happened in the last 30 years.
They're telling me I have to choose sides. I can't defend the rights of Donald Trump without being perceived as a supporter of his policies.
Okay. The Campus Liberty Tour is made possible by the support of many individuals, businesses, and foundations who share our vision for teaching critical thinking skills and encouraging free speech and debate on college campuses across America. It is because of the unwavering support and vision of these supporters that we're able to bring this compelling debate to you this evening. Our sponsors include Gary Cooper of Cooper Steel in Nashville, Judy and Robert Newman of the Newman Family Foundation, the Anschutz Foundation, David and Nell Box, the Lind and Harry Bradley Foundation, Harris Farms in California, Paige Lee Hufty, Irene Johnson, Mountain Valley Bank, Tina Snyder, and the Woodford Foundation for Limited Government. And I would like again to thank the Political Economy Research Institute here at Middle Tennessee State and the Beacon Center in Nashville for their partnership in bringing this debate to you tonight. And finally, before I introduce you to our debaters and moderator, I would like to remind you that tonight's debate is being live streamed on Steamboat Institute's Facebook page and YouTube channel. All audience members, both those of you attending in person and online, may submit questions to our debaters by using the link to our online platform. This link was sent to all of you who registered in advance in an email about an hour ago. So you can click on the link in that email to submit your questions this evening. Also, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, you should see a link there to submit questions as well. Our moderator will be monitoring that on a tablet and will ask questions of our debaters during the course of the debate. So now let me introduce our debaters and moderator. Tonight's debaters are Leslie Marshall and Dr. Art Laffer. Leslie Marshall is a political analyst, national radio host, and Fox News contributor who provides political analysis from a liberal point of view. She's seen regularly on programs including Special Report with Bret Baier, Hannity, and Tucker Carlson. Leslie's weekly opinion blogs on foxnews.com receive between 3 and 4 million views each week, and her TEDx talk has been viewed over 700,000 times. Leslie earned her bachelor's degree from Northeastern University and attended Emerson College for her master's. Leslie lives in Los Angeles with her husband and their 2 children. Dr. Art Laffer is founder and chairman of Laffer Associates in Nashville and was a member of President Reagan's Economic Policy Advisory Board. Dr. Laffer also advised Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher on fiscal policy in the UK during the 1980s. He has been a faculty member at the University of Chicago, University of Southern California, and Pepperdine. Dr. Laffer received a BA in economics from Yale and an MBA and PhD in economics from Stanford. Dr. Laffer was the creator of the Laffer curve, which illustrates the trade-off between tax rates and the total tax revenues actually collected by the government. He is widely regarded as the father of supply-side economics. Dr. Laffer lives in Nashville and enjoys spending time with his children and grandchildren. And in 2019, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Trump. Our moderator for this evening's debate is Hadley Heath Manning. Hadley is Director of Policy at Independent Women's Forum and is a Tony Blankley Senior Fellow with the Steamboat Institute. Hadley appears frequently on radio and TV outlets across the country, commenting on healthcare, entitlements, and economic policy. She graduated from the University of North Carolina with a double major in economics and journalism. Hadley lives in Denver with her husband and 2 children. Let's give a warm welcome to our debaters and moderator for this evening's debate. Welcome.
Whew. Good evening. Anybody else take their mask off like they just did 10 hours of heart surgery? That's how I feel when I take my mask off. So we're the lucky ones up here on stage. We're going to show you our faces. And we're so happy to be here for a substantive and civil debate. I'd like to remind everyone who's with us in person or virtually that you should have received an email with a link not only to submit your own questions, but also to fill out our virtual poll. I'm going to be reading the results of that poll. It's a pre-poll in just a moment. So if you haven't filled it out yet, now's the time to get out your phone and do so. I'm also going to share a little bit about the format of tonight's debate. We're going to hear first opening remarks from Ms. Marshall and then Dr. Laffer of no more than 8 minutes. And then each debater will have the opportunity to offer a 2-minute rebuttal to those opening statements. And that will be followed by moderator-led question and answer. And then I will gladly accept questions from the audience. And again, you submit those using the online platform. We won't be taking in-person Q&A. So if you're here with us in person and you have a question, please use the online platform to submit it. And thank you so much. Thanks, Jennifer, for the kind introductions. Thank you to Middle Tennessee State University for being our hosts. Thank you to my sister, who's a graduate student here at MTSU, for attending and being my personal host for this trip. Thank you to all of you who are attending with us in person. And thank you to our virtual audience as well. So now for the results of our poll. The poll question is, will a wealth tax and higher income tax rates increase prosperity and opportunity in America? And we have the answers. 16.6% said yes and agree with the position that Ms. Marshall will represent tonight. We had a little bit more than 60% say no and agreed with Dr. Laffer's position. And then we had about 23% of people said they're undecided. So I will check in at the end of tonight's debate to see if any minds have changed or if there's been any shift in the polls. But first, let's get started with an opening statement from Ms. Marshall.
And Mom, if you're watching, get that number up for me, would you? That's an uphill climb. Hi. Thank you for having me. It's only my second time in Tennessee, and I only drove through the state once, so I'm glad to be staying here a little bit longer this time. And I'm flattered and honored to be here and to be debating this illustrious gentleman. I have to say, when I was first asked to debate Dr. Laffer about economics, okay, about the wealth tax, when he has a PhD in economics from Stanford University, and I have an undergraduate degree in speech communications from Northeastern University, a master's degree in broadcast journalism from Emerson College, I'm a political analyst and a Democratic strategist, a talk show host, and a writer, I thought they must have confused me with Elizabeth Warren. But I am here. And the reason I said yes is this. I'm not an economist. But neither is the average voter, neither is the average taxpayer. I don't have a PhD in anything. I don't have any kind of a degree in economics, and I did not attend an Ivy League university. I'm not a great mind in economics. And you know what? Most people in America aren't either. I'm one of them, and many of you are as well. They know how they feel about the economy based on what they get in their paychecks and their ability or inability to provide for their families, to pay their mortgage or rent, put food on the table, clothes on their children's backs, and pay for health care or pay for their co-pays, co-insurance, medications. So let's see how the American people, the voters, the taxpayers, those who are most affected by taxation policies in our nation, let's see how they feel about the wealth tax. No insult to this poll. Recent polling finds that a wealth tax is extremely popular, by the way. The most recent poll is a Hill-Harris poll. It found 74% of registered voters back an annual 2% tax on people with assets over $50 million and a 3% tax on people with assets in excess of $1 billion. There was another poll by Reuters Ipsos that found nearly 2/3, 64% of respondents agree that very rich people should pay more. And new polling is finding broad support for an annual wealth tax on people with assets of at least $50 million, and that underlies more and more support for taxing the rich. The poll showed support for the idea among people of all ages and races, and even though our president himself has branded the wealth tax as socialist, there's actually support from both Democrats and Republicans. 65% of GOP voters supported it, 86% of Democrats, 69% of independents. How many opposed? Just 26%. The proposal also had strong support along all racial groups and in all regions of the nation. 73% of voters favored it in Western states, 72% backed it in the South, 73% in the Midwest, and 78% in where I come from originally, the Northeast. And get this. A majority of Republicans actually support the wealth tax if you don't call it a wealth tax. So when you ask, should the wealthy pay more in taxes for funding social programs, the answer is a resounding yes. In the Democratic primaries, there were people like Elizabeth Warren, senator from Massachusetts, who had proposals, and hers specifically had come under attack. Even Mike Bloomberg, one of the late to the game Democratic candidates, argued that a wealth tax would drive rich people to hide their incomes or withdraw their money from the economy. But from where I stand, rich people already do that. The president's tax returns prove that the rich pay less in taxes. Warren Buffett's tax returns prove that he pays less in taxes than his administrative assistant. And like I said, I am not an economist. So, what do some of the top economists say? With America's large wealth gap and the United States government's need for revenue, new taxes need to be implemented to raise more money from the rich, and the way to do that is with a wealth tax. Now, those aren't my words. Those are the wording of economists Joseph E. Stiglitz and Thomas Piketty. Stiglitz is the recipient of a Nobel Prize in economics and a professor at Columbia University. He went on to say, quote, "Where we are today in the 21st century, a basic middle-class life is not accessible to very large portions of America. And Piketty, who's an author and a professor at the Paris School of Economics, he said, at the same time, the wealthiest people in the world are growing richer, often at rates faster than the economy overall. So it makes sense to ask this group of wealthy people to contribute more to the public good via a wealth tax. Now, those are just two examples of economists that are on board with a wealth tax. So how about the wealthy themselves? In the United States, there's a group some of you may have heard of. They're a group of millionaires, and they appropriately are called the Patriotic Millionaires. They are a group of hundreds of high net worth Americans who are committed to making all Americans, including themselves, better off by building a more prosperous, stable, and inclusive nation. Their group focuses on promoting public policy solutions that encourage political equality, guarantee a sustaining wage for working Americans, and ensure that billionaires, and corporations pay their fair share of taxes. Bill Gates, who is the second richest person in the world, he has a current net worth of $108.8 billion with a B, and that's according to Forbes, says his extreme wealth isn't fair. Quote, "The distance between top and bottom incomes in the United States is much greater than it was 50 years ago. A few people end up with a great deal. I've been disproportionately rewarded for the work I've done, while many others who work just as hard struggle to get by." Former Secretary of Labor Robert Reich said, Jeff Bezos could give every Amazon employee $105,000 and still be as rich as he was before the pandemic. Now, if that doesn't convince you that we need a wealth tax, I'm not sure what will. Income inequality. Well, if you look at elections and exit polls and the people that have voted, this is very important to voters, and not just on the Democratic side of the aisle, but across the board. The country is in the midst of a recession, right? Nearly 8 in 10 registered voters, 79%, say the economy is going to be very important to them in making their decision about who to vote for in the 2020 presidential election. Recently, former Vice President Joe Biden said the election's now between Scranton and Park Avenue. And you know, we haven't had such a gap between the haves and the have-nots since the Gilded Age, and that was during Teddy Roosevelt's presidency from 1901 to 1909. An era in American history defined in part by extreme wealth inequality between industrial folks, the working class, and folks like the Rockefellers and J.P. Morgans. Does that sound familiar? It's pretty much what we have and we are entering into now. Oh my God, I'm almost out of time. I'm going to have to jump ahead a bit. Right now, we're in the midst of a pandemic, right? And if you think back to the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis in this country, back in March, you might remember all the doomsday headlines about the stock market that was going to tank to record lows, how investors would lose millions of dollars as a result. But you know, that's not what happened. The stock market has almost recovered all of its losses that were incurred since the pandemic began. Many investors have recovered all of their losses and even started to get richer. In other words, the wealthy are doing just fine. It's the other folks that aren't. The central problem of our economy right now is that too few ultra-wealthy people have all the money, and too many low-income folks have too little. The solution is as obvious as it is effective. Take just a little bit from the few and give it to the many. A wealth tax is the perfect way to do that, and we need it now more than ever. Thank you.
Great job, by the way. Let me just say, Jennifer, wherever you are out there, that cocktail party with margaritas in the open air up in Colorado gives new meaning to the word Rocky Mountain High. And it's just as exciting. I want to say thank you for all of you for coming to Tennessee. I moved here. I moved here, let's say, I think it was in 2006. I was a Californian for most of my life. I moved here, and it's because of the economic policies here. And, you know, when you look at Tennessee, I think it really tells the whole story about what I'm trying to talk about on economics. I moved to Tennessee because I did an analysis of all the states. I've really specialized in states. California had just raised taxes. I was on the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors. That was Schwarzenegger. And when he raised them, I said, I'm out of here, I got to leave. And I looked at all the states, and I chose Tennessee. And I want to welcome you to Tennessee as well. It's not, when I moved here, Tennessee was not a Republican state. We had 6 out of 8 of our congressional delegation were Democrats. The governor was a Democrat. Both houses of the legislature were Democrats. Some of you may have heard of Cordell Hull. He was the person from Tennessee who really put in the income tax in the U.S. There are the two Al Gores, Al Gore Sr. and Al Gore Jr., who are from here. You know, when you look at Tennessee, we have no income tax. We also have no unearned income tax as of January 1st this coming year. It's just amazing. No unearned. We have no death tax. We have no gift tax. We have one of the lowest property taxes in the nation. It's just an amazing state, and I chose it out of all the states. When you look at the tax burden, Tennessee has the third lowest tax burden of any state in the nation. It also has it's a right-to-work state, where you don't have to join a union to get a job. You know, it's an amazingly free enterprise state, and if you look at what's happened. Now here we are, the third lowest tax state in the nation, no income tax, low property taxes, all right, and no death tax, and yet we have a budget surplus as of right now of a little less than $1 billion on a total budget of $23 billion, a surplus. Not only do we have a surplus, our pension funds in the state of Tennessee are fully funded. We're ranking right at the very top 2 or 3 states in the nation on the funding of pension funds for state and local pensions workers. If you look at this, we have the highest single credit rating of any state in the nation. It's phenomenal. We are very rapidly growing. If you look at our unemployment rate today and before the pandemic is well below the national average. We've been growing very rapidly. We're not only growing, but a lot of the migrants are bringing their money with them as well. We have a huge inflow of adjusted gross income into the state. If you look at our public services, when Lamar Alexander was governor of the state of Tennessee, we were ranked 38th in the nation for highway quality. Today we're ranked 7th in highway quality. The most important public services I think states can provide are in education. If you look at the Department of Education's measures of the education of 4th grade and 8th grade, which they look at it every several years. They look at 4th grade reading and 4th grade math. They look at 8th grade reading and 8th grade math. If you look at Tennessee's performance in that level, it's astounding. We've had one of the top increases in performance in 4th grade reading, in 4th grade math, in 8th grade reading, and in 8th grade math. Differences between male and female students has dropped dramatically, virtually unrecognizable, indistinguishable. Between African Americans and white Americans, the gap has narrowed dramatically as well. We have wonderful there. And if you look at Tennessee is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. We have low taxes, rapid growth, fully funded, and improving public services. Now, we're not alone. Tennessee isn't the only example I could give on this. We have a lot of sister states, and you know them well. If you look at Florida, or Texas, or Nevada, Washington State, South Dakota, New Hampshire, they're all doing really, really, really well. And then compare those states, if you will, just with the other states. There are a whole mess of other states that have introduced an income tax in the last 60 years, starting in 1961 with West Virginia. They put in their income tax in 1961. West Virginia is a basket case. If you've been to West Virginia, it's nothing but poverty. Then you can go not only from West Virginia, you can look at Illinois. Illinois has this huge exodus coming as people just are leaving the state in droves. Michigan. Now, in 1950, Michigan had no income tax at all. The size of Detroit in 1950 was 1.85 million. Today, Detroit's population is under 600,000. I mean, this is the exodus going. My mom and dad, I was raised in Cleveland, Ohio, and my mom and dad used to take us on vacation to Detroit, if you can imagine. It was the Paris of North America. Go to Detroit today and see what's happened. You look at Ohio, my home state, same thing, introduced. Pennsylvania, Rhode Island introduced it. Connecticut in 1991, unfortunately, a fellow Yaley introduced the income tax, Lowell Weicker in 1991. And Connecticut, which is one of the fastest growing states, most prosperous states, just did a U-turn and straight south to where it's now one of the worst performers. And then you've got New Jersey. Think of it, in 1965, New Jersey had neither an income tax nor a sales tax. Neither one. One of the fastest growing states in the nation, people from everywhere were moving into New Jersey, and it had a balanced budget. If you look at New Jersey today, it's the antithesis of what it was. You know, when I look at your home state and my home state, Leslie, as well, I mean, if we look at California, and I'm from California, I left, I came here, I love California, and it's just great. But California has the highest taxes in the nation. People are leaving that state. It has the highest paid teachers in the nation, the highest paid, and yet its student test scores are amongst the very lowest in the nation. If you look at the poverty rate in California, poverty in California is the single highest poverty rate in the nation. It's just a tragedy. And then you look at the one thing that happened with California, which was wonderful, by the way, which I was very involved in. The one thing is they had a wealth tax in California that was really high. It's called a property tax. In 1977, the property tax in California was 2.7% of market value. We dropped that with Prop 13 down to 1%. The state of California has never grown. We passed Prop 13 with a vote of 64%. You know, when I look at states, it's emblematic of what's going on. And what I'd like to ask you today was, why would anyone want to follow the high tax states and with the record they'd had? And why wouldn't we all want to follow the examples of the no income tax states? That's my position. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Marshall, you have the opportunity to offer a rebuttal for 2 minutes.
Okay. Tennessee is a lovely state, but one of the reasons we have in this nation federal policies and state policies is because states differ so much. Just look at Tennessee and California. My home state is Massachusetts, by the way, the first of the colonies. But I do live in California. And I've been blessed to live in many states in this country, sadly not Tennessee, but you know, who knows, maybe someday. But in California, if you're going to just look at Tennessee and California, for example, you have different geography, right? So you have different weather, different climate. You have different topography, okay? You have different demographics. And looking at California alone, you cannot ignore California's population, right? California has, and it hovers between 5th and 6th largest economy in the world, okay? It sets apart from other states. You talk about right to work. I come from a long line of blue-collar, union-working men. I do, sheet metal workers. So I'm very, very pro-union, and I don't want people to be forced to join a union, or you have to join a union to work, but I do want people to have that option and to be able to sit down at a table and have that collective bargaining power. In the Bush administration, taxes were lowered, and it was the belief that the rich would reinvest in our nation. But if you look back, that's not what happened. The rich still continued to have their products made overseas, ship their companies overseas. Manufacturing was not coming up. And they invested in Turkish bonds. They put money in their pocket. They didn't reinvest in America. And although people are leaving California, for everyone that leaves, 2 enter, and we have more that are being born. Yes, poverty is an issue. Homelessness is an issue. Part of that is the issue of our size. And Prop 13, Doctor, I love you, and with all due respect, you know what's happening in November.
We'll see.
In November, Prop 13 is on the ballot, not to be, removed or annihilated, to be chipped away at a little, and it looks like it may happen. I'm out of time.
Oh, you're what? That's great.
Dr. Laffer, your 2-minute rebuttal.
Yeah, I want to just start off and say I agree with Leslie on 2 things. I completely agree with her that people should have the right to join a union if they want to and not join the union if they don't want to. That's what's called right to work. And I agree with you, and I'm glad you're supporting that position because I really do too. Let me also tell you that I totally agree with you that the rich are not paying their fair share in taxes. They are not. But the reason they're not paying their fair share is not because tax rates are too high. It's because there are way too many loopholes. It creates this whole buddy system. They move from Goldman Sachs to the White House, back and forth, putting in new regulations. The examples I want to use for you here, and I think you'll love this one. Warren Buffett wrote a piece in 2011 in the New York Times where he talked about his income tax and how he paid $7 million in taxes, which is less, as a percentage of his income, is less than anyone else in his office. In fact, it was half his secretary's pay. And he said he paid only 17.4% of his income in taxes. Now, I did the math. I flipped it or divide 7 million by 0.174, and his income that year, taxable income, was 38 million. Now, knowing that he deducts his charitable contribution, I was able to get his adjusted gross income was 62 million. That's a lot of money. I mean, that's really a lot of money. But then when you look at that and you sit there and say he had 62 million, we economists consider income in a very different way than normal people do. We consider income to be what you spend, what you give away, and your increase in wealth. In 2010, Warren Buffett's wealth increased by $10 billion. Warren Buffett gave away $1.75 billion to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He also gave to his wife's foundation, his 2 sons' foundation, and his daughter's foundation, all legal. And by doing that gift, it wiped away all of his capital gains taxes. If you look at what Warren Buffett's income really was, his really was $12 billion. His effective tax rate was 0.06%. It's not a tax rate issue, Leslie. It's a deduction issue. What we want is a low-rate, broad-based flat tax, just like Jerry Brown ran on in 1992.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for those opening remarks and rebuttals. We've got a lot of content to get into. I hope we talk more about deductions. Before we get into some of the more specific stuff, I do want to ask a sort of clarifying question out the gate, and that is, tonight we're really considering 2 policy measures, a wealth tax and also higher income tax rates, or maybe specifically a higher top tax income rate. And so I want to ask the 2 panelists to offer their definitions. What is a wealth tax versus higher income tax? Do you support both of those policy changes? Are the implications of those 2 policy changes the same or different, and how so? So let's sort of get into what those 2 policy changes are. Leslie, I'm sorry, Ms. Marshall, I'll start with you.
You can call me Leslie, it's fine. A wealth tax is a tax based on the market value of owned assets. Now, many developed countries choose tax wealth, not income and just income, but the United States historically has favored taxing just income. And recently, the immense and increasing disparity in the wealth in our nation, especially as of 2018, where we had the wealthiest 10% owning 70% of the country's wealth, while the richest 1% owned 32%. Well, the wealth tax is imposed on the wealth, not just the income, possessed by individuals. In our nation, for example, obviously it would be country by country. The tax is usually on that person's net worth, okay? So you have what their wealth is minus the liabilities. These assets are included and not limited to cash, bank deposits, shares, fixed assets, personal cars, assessed value of real property, pension plans, money funds, owner-occupied housing, and trust. By the way, an ad valorem tax on real estate and an intangible tax on financial assets are actually both examples of a wealth tax. They are used not only in the United States, but and not in the United States, proposed in the United States, used in other countries, continue to be used in other countries, principally as a means of not just, it's not to punish the rich people, but to promote social equity by reducing disparities in wealth holdings, hoping that that's going to promote more equality. In the United States, the proposal is not just for financial equality, to offset that income inequality, which is a huge issue for the middle class and especially for voters, but it's also to offset political inequality, because the richest people have the most power politically, and that's not fair to the masses, especially the middle class who make up the majority of our nation. On the one hand, you can think of it something like property taxes people pay on their homes, but applied to all their wealth. And remember, it is above a certain level, okay? So if you look back at what was proposed by 2 people who are famously known for talking about the wealth tax, one is Bernie Sanders, whose tax would only affect people with wealth of over 32 million, and then of course Elizabeth Warren, who you guys thought I was, no, I'm just joking, who would affect only people with 50 million and over. Sanders' plan would affect around 182,000 people if implemented. Warren's plan would affect 70,000. Now, you ask about the wealth tax versus increasing an income tax. Part of the problem, wealth tax is not, like I said, punishing. It's asking those who have more to help those who have less. But if you have an increase in income tax, that's going to, in a sense, hurt some of the most vulnerable segment of our population, and not just middle class, but lower income families as well.
Okay, Dr. Laffer, wealth tax, income tax?
Yeah, well, I would agree with Leslie on her.
Stop agreeing with me.
Huh? But I would, the definition of it there, and when you look at a wealth tax, a wealth tax makes a lot of sense. There was a famous economist, Californian, in the 19th century who wrote about a wealth tax as being the only tax, which was Henry George. And it was a phenomenal thing. It was the craze from 1879 to probably 1900. I mean, it never got passed or anything, but it did. But recently, we've had wealth taxes in this world, and the OECD did a little study on countries with wealth taxes. In 1990, I think there were 12 OECD countries that had wealth taxes. Those wealth taxes did not work out very well for those countries. By the time we got to 2017, all but 4 had gotten rid of their wealth taxes, and the 4 that kept their wealth taxes had greatly diminished their wealth tax dramatically. And then finally in 1918, even Monsieur Piketty's country got rid of its wealth tax, dropping it down in 2018 to only 3 countries with a wealth tax. We've tried it. It works not very well, and it was very unpopular and removed. So on the wealth tax, I wouldn't, what I'd like to do is just one thing on economics, and forgive me, this is my teacher in me in economics, but when you think of the transfer of taking from one group to another, that's called redistribution. Mm-hmm. And let me give you a math theorem on redistribution, if I may. Redistribution is when you take from someone who has more and you give to someone who has less. Are all of you with me on that? I mean, that is classic redistribution. Now, by taking from someone who has more, you reduce that person's incentives to produce, and they will produce less. By giving to someone who has less, you provide that person with an alternative source of income other than working, and that person too will produce less. The theorem here is really simple. Whenever you redistribute income, you always reduce total income. Now, that does not mean it's not worth redistributing, because some people are helped in the process. But now, the lemma of this theorem is beautiful. The more you redistribute, the greater will be the drop in total income. And the limit function of this theorem is also delicious as well. If you were able to achieve total redistribution, where everyone in the society came out exactly the same, there will be no income whatsoever. The only way you can assure complete redistribution of income is you have to tax everyone who makes above the average income 100% of the excess. And what you also have to do is subsidize everyone below the average income up to the average income. If you actually did that, if you actually taxed everyone above the average income 100% of the excess, and actually subsidize everyone below the average income up to the average income, I'll stipulate today, counselor, it'll be complete equality of income at 0. In simple terms, if you tax people who work and you pay people who don't work, do not be surprised if you get less people working. And it's just simple math. It's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's not liberal, it's not conservative, it's not left-wing, it's not right-wing. It's math. And that's what it is.
So as a follow-up question to you mentioned some of the evidence from other countries that had experimented with wealth taxes. You said they abandoned them. Just as a clarification, did they abandon them because they were not successful at raising revenue, or because they were unpopular? And I'll let you
love to answer that.
You want to go to that?
No, you go.
Okay, I mean, they were unpopular politically, very much so. And in fact, it overthrew several governments in the process there of some of those 12 countries. But also, they weren't particularly good at raising revenues. These people like Warren Buffett, the example I give you, they're very clever. They're not only clever, they can hire better lawyers, accountants, income specialists, all of this thing, and they can figure out ways. It's very difficult to develop a plan that really will enforce a wealth tax on a system. It just is, because these guys are all major contributors to the political parties. When you see Obama or Trump hanging around with a group of people from the outside, don't think for a moment that's a group of street people trying to explain to them what it's like being poor. It's not. These are people from Goldman Sachs and from other groups trying to put in loopholes and things, and they've contributed to these things, and they're successful. What you need is a low-rate, broad-based flat tax with no distinctions in income. What you want to do is have a low rate to provide the least incentive for people to evade, avoid, or otherwise not report taxable income. And you want the broadest possible base, so you provide the least places to where people can put their income and not have to pay taxes. That's the simple. If we'd had Jerry Brown's flat tax in 2010, Warren Buffett would have paid $1.7 billion in taxes, which he should have paid. You know, to me, I don't think it's fair when Warren Buffett pays less in taxes than his secretary. That's wrong. If you make 5 times as much as me, you should pay 5 times as much in taxes as I do. You know, that's the moral equivalent. But when you try to overtax the rich, what you do is you get them to try to evade and avoid and not report the taxes. And by the way, the economics literature, and I don't mean just the, excuse me for PhDing it here, but the economics literature was enormous documentation on the effects on tax evasion, tax avoidance, shifting of income, inversions, state and local government. There's huge amounts of evidence how people use those tax codes to avoid paying taxes. A low-rate flat tax, and I'll agree with you, Leslie, the rich should pay a heck of a lot more, and they're not, because they're doing this because they think the tax codes are really unfair. And in my view, they really are unfair.
Let's hear from Ms. Marshall about the evidence from overseas, or anything else you'd like to respond to.
3 things we agree on in that, because we
dangerous.
both, I know it is dangerous. We both, that's what happens when I agree with somebody at Fox. The directors go, what? What's happening? Stop it. You know? 1, loopholes. You know, that is definitely a huge problem. 2, I do believe the rich should pay more differently than you do. And 3, thank you in a sense for proving my point that Goldman Sachs is hanging around Donald Trump and Barack Obama. Why? Because they have that political power. Why? Because they have so much wealth. And the wealthy run the world with the money and the influence they have with their money over politicians. So let's talk about Europe, okay? For skeptics, the case pretty much was, the tax was abolished, and that means it's not workable, and that, we shouldn't do that here. But that's not true. In Europe, they tolerate tax competition. A tax-averse Parisian just needs to move to Brussels to become immediately free from taxation in their nation of France. The EU has never restricted tax competition, and any common tax policy requires that all of the EU member states have to be unanimous, and that would make such a policy extraordinarily unlikely. And what's more, EU member states don't try to tax their nationals living abroad, so tax competition was probably sufficient by itself to kill the European wealth taxes, all on its own. The situation in the United States is quite different. You can't shirk your tax responsibilities by moving, because U.S. citizens are responsible to the IRS no matter where they live. Sad but true, the European wealth taxes also included a myriad of exemptions, deductions, and other breaks that some of the plans, like Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders' plans, forego. France had numerous exemptions. Paintings, exempt. Businesses owned by their managers, exempt. Their main homes, exempt. Wealthy French received a 30% deduction on those, and shares in small or medium-sized enterprises got a 75% exemption. So the list of tax breaks for the wealthy just grew year after year after year. One reason such deductions were deemed politically necessary in Europe is the wealth taxes fell on a much broader population than those that are proposed here in the United States. Like I mentioned before, in Warren's plan, all net wealth below $50 million is exempted. Sanders' version, the exemption would be below $32 million. And in Europe, wealth taxes have tended to start around $1 million. And that means they hit about 2% of the population, compared with 0.1% of the population that would be affected by those plans proposed by Senators Sanders and Warren.
Thank you. So we've had a lot of agreement. I'm going to ask my next question in hopes of getting to the heart of maybe where there's some disagreement. And if you'll forgive me, it sounds a little bit like a beauty pageant question, but rather than asking about your...
I lose already. By the way, I just thought...
Rather than asking about your idea of the perfect date, I'm going to ask both debaters to describe their perfect tax system. And I think we'll get pretty different answers from Ms. Marshall and Dr. Laffer, and then we can talk about sort of the benefits and the consequences of going in those, what I expect will be two very different directions for tax policy. So Dr. Laffer's already hinted at his by explaining the flat tax with no deductions, no loopholes. Ms. Marshall, what's your idea of the perfect tax system?
When you look at where we are today, any tax plan, and I'm not an economist, so I would probably ask him to come and give me some advice, but the tax plan would have to strengthen the middle class and protect the middle class. We really haven't had that. We don't have that now. That's one of the reasons the wealth tax is so attractive to so many people, and it doesn't matter if they're Democrat or Republican. A weak middle class holds back economic growth, and it undermines our democracy, technically. So proper tax policy would play a critical role in rebuilding the middle class, which is essential to our nation prevailing. You know what, I don't want to get them mad, but the words trickle down scare a lot of people. Because, you know, it sounds in theory like a great idea, but what's trickling down and to whom? I mean, trickle-down economics seems to only benefit the top 1%, and the economy seems to work best, at least just from my novice Economics 101, when it grows from the middle out. So, you make a tax code that is fairer to address ballooning inequality. No tax expenditures that benefit the wealthy. Set up uniform credits with the same value to all taxpayers. Make the tax code simpler, which I think all of us, especially middle or lower income, can benefit from, myself included. Make tax credit compliance easier for working families, speaking to the middle class again. Set up a tax code that generates enough revenue to protect and invest in the middle class and the wealth tax, and no loopholes for the wealthy I'll throw in as well.
Do you have anything to add, Dr. Laffer, about your perfect tax system?
Well, I can't. All taxes are bad, but some are worse than others. And what you want to do is collect your taxes in the least damaging fashion. And what you want to do is spend the money in the most productive, beneficial fashion. You know, when the damage done by the last dollar of taxes collected is less than the benefit done by the last dollar spent, you stop already. Any taxation and spending below that amount, you don't tax enough, you haven't spent enough. Any amount above that, you've taxed too much, you've spent too much. There is a very major role for government in the tax process. It is. But my view is, I would much rather have the tax policies be far more voluntary than you would like them to be. I want all Americans to agree that the tax codes are fair, not only those who receive the benefits in spending, but I want also the taxpayers to agree. Everyone here knows very, very well you got to pay your share. Everyone understands that. This society lives on the government and requires it. But when it gets out of hand, when it becomes persecutory, that's when you start getting all of these other policies. You know, my view is a low-rate, broad-based, flat tax is fair. Jerry Brown, I did that with him in 1992, as you know. And he proposed a 13% flat tax. If we got rid of all federal taxes, with the exception of sin taxes, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, I guess I jokingly say we Americans don't like drunk people smoking while we shoot each other. Yeah. But they're just a little tiny bit. If you replaced all federal taxes with two flat taxes, one on business net sales, if you're a Democrat, that's called a value-added tax. If you're a Republican, it's a net sales tax. And then the other one is on a broad-based flat tax on income with no deductions, no exemptions, no exclusions. You can match statically all federal revenues with a 12% tax on each. I mean, it's just incredible. That's fair. Warren Buffett would no longer want to find all these tax shelters. He'd pay his taxes fair and square, and we all would. All of this hostility, IRS audits, and all of that stuff would come way, way down, and you'd have a voluntary system, which is bringing all of us in America together, taxpayers and benefit recipients, is my view of the world and where it goes. That's the moral argument, at least for me, and the economic argument.
Ms. Marshall, where do you see the flat tax? Is it something that would be attractive to you as something that could benefit the middle class, or is it a non-starter? Do you believe in a more progressive income tax rate for different income brackets?
No, I do believe that those who have more should pay more. To whom much is given, much is expected. You touched on moral. So actually, in preparation for this, I dusted off my Bible. My mother would be thrilled to hear that. And, I was just like looking at, WWJD, what would Jesus do? Since we are looking at morals. By the way, the Pope tweeted yesterday that we need to care about income inequality more. and we should tax the rich. I thought it was funny. He must have known I was speaking today. He was giving me a few notes. But Jesus, by the way, in the Bible, if we're talking about, being a majority Christian nation, it's actually very Christian if I have one child but 6 eggs and you have 6 children but 1 egg to give you my eggs, or to give you some of my eggs. And I like that concept as a nation. Not socialism. I know people think, the government's got to, take care of everybody. No, we take care of each other. So if I have, and to whom much is given to me, much is expected, it is expected of me to help you. And when you talk about people, working less, I understand your, the fish analogy, if you want to, don't give them a fish, teach them how to fish. But when we're looking at things that require help on a larger scale, such as education, when we're looking at things like healthcare, when we're looking at things like scientific research, heck, even our military, we say in COVID, we're all in this together. Well, we were all in this together before, and we're going to all be in this together afterward. So why aren't we all helping each other? I mean, there is no reason that any child should go to bed hungry in this nation. There is no reason that anybody should, when we're past this pandemic, be out of work, be suffering. I mean, really, when you look at the wealth and you look at, from a moral standpoint, when you look at just how I've lived in other countries, okay? I've lived in Mexico. I've lived in Pakistan. And let me tell you, until you've lived in a third world nation, I mean, I knew I had it good. I didn't know how good I had it, and we had it. We have a responsibility, I believe, with all that we have, with all of our wealth as a nation, as leaders in the world, and helping each other. And I think that's a human thing to do, and I think it's quite moral as well. And Pope Francis agrees with me.
I would love to hear Dr. Laffer's response to that, the morality or immorality of redistribution. And I want to remind everyone in the audience, because I'm about to pivot to your questions, you have the opportunity to submit those through our online platform using a link in your registration email. But Dr. Laffer, please tell us what you think about this.
Let me, if I can, I don't disagree with you again on any of this. We do have this. I mean, most of it I think is private. I've got 6 kids, 13 grandchildren, 4 great-grandchildren. I mean, it's a wonderful family, and we do the egg stuff all the time, if you know what I mean. But, I mean, there's a tithing issue, too, which is the flat tax, which Jerry Brown and I were doing together at the time. All of that. But when you look at this, let me give you an example. There's today in Philadelphia, there's a single mother with 1 child. If she earns $29,000 a year earned income, okay? She has to pay all of her taxes on that $29,000. She gets her after-tax income. You with me? Because she has the low income and 1 child, she's eligible for something like 13 separate Philadelphia and Pennsylvania welfare programs, each of which has a monetary value. If you take all of that welfare she's eligible for and her after-tax income and add them together, you get her total spending power at $29,000 a year income. You all follow me in this, please do? If this lady decides to get gumption and get up and really go for it, and she goes from $29,000 up to $58,000 a year income through hard work, through perseverance, through gumption, if she does that, and you go at $58,000, you take all of her taxes out of her income and you find out what she has after tax. You go back and look at all of her welfare recipient benefits she gets, which have now all been eliminated because she has an earnings test on all of them. She doesn't get it. Her spending power at $58,000 is less than her spending power at $29,000. It's a welfare trap keeping these people in poverty, despair, because every dollar they earn, they lose more in welfare than they get from the income. That's wrong. It's just plain wrong. You've got to make it so there are incentives for people to improve their own lots and not just always have handouts. It's not their fault. If you look at the inner cities, now I lived at the inner city in Chicago. I was on the faculty there for 10 years and went through all the ranks there. I lived in the south side of Chicago. In fact, the story is that when my family and I moved to Southern California, my old neighborhood was no longer integrated. I wrote something for tax policy here on the inner cities. Not a welfare payment program which cuts off when you make some money. I wanted to make an enterprise zone. Now, this was in 76. I wrote enterprise zones, which would get rid of the income tax up to $50,000 a year income. No income tax. I got rid of the payroll tax in totality, neither for employers and employees, for companies that are located in the enterprise zone and whose principal residence is also the enterprise zone. You had to get rid of the teenage minimum wage. You know, these kids come out of this thing, you know, they aren't worth $15 an hour. They can't get a job. So what happens? They don't get a job, they become unemployable after a year or two. After being unemployable for a couple of years, they all of a sudden become hostile. And then you have to spend your funds to protect yourself from them. This is an immoral system that we have here. What we need to do is have enterprise zones and allow these kids to come up the ranks by improving and getting jobs, output employment, regulations, restrictions, and requirements. There was this one guy, he had a fried chicken place. I knew him pretty well. And you know, he was a great place, and the city council person, one alderman staffer, came in and said, you know, I looked in the city codes, volume 75, page 3,206, footnote 921. You know, your bathroom is 2.5 feet too close to your kitchen, and we'll have to shut you down. You know what it's like in the inner city. And so the guy either paid the bribe or they shut him down. You know, this is not right. You have to make sure your regulations are not anti-growth, anti-entrepreneur, anti-initiative. There's nothing wrong with helping those who can't help themselves, but there's a real problem with not allowing people who can help themselves the opportunity to help themselves. And the other real problem is making sure your programs don't go so far, Leslie, that they create the very problem you're trying to cure. And that's the one I really worry about here. We are creating poverty traps in Philadelphia, and all the cities, by the way. It's in LA, it's everywhere, these welfare traps. And we're creating the very problem we're trying to cure, and we're doing it with sanctimonious views of morals, how we have to tell. Nonsense. We're creating the problem and then doing all we can to make it worse. And I want to see us stop that and really get to a pro-growth, fair society that helps the poor, the minorities, the disenfranchised, who are being just destroyed by our tax system and by our welfare system.
Do you want to respond?
Yes. I sort of tiny bit kind of agree with you with...
Uh-oh. Oh, no.
I actually agree with something called Welfare to Workfare, which was a bipartisan effort by former Governor Tommy Thompson of Wisconsin and former President Bill Clinton. You had a Democrat and Republican, and I do believe in that and incentives. If you look at the studies that are done, especially of single women who are on welfare or have been on welfare, they don't want to be in the system. Certainly, there are some generational welfare families that we have in the system, and that's a problem, and that's a systemic problem that has to be broken, and a lot of that plays into racial disparity and income inequality in our nation. But, you know, I agree with you. It's unfair to keep these people down. But who keeps these people down? Who stops that college?
The tax code.
Who stops that? No, it's that rich corporate. The rich corporations. You're making $71 million a year, right? And even and the higher. Let's take the head of a pharmaceutical company, all right? And you increase the amount of the medication that you're charging. The middle and lower income having a harder time to pay for insulin or whatever it is, and you profit off of that increase. Yeah. We saw that in hearings just last week on Capitol Hill. Here's the deal. You don't need to be making $71 billion. And if you didn't care about making $71 billion, you would be able to open up areas of employment for others so that some of you wouldn't have your 25-year-old master's degree kid living on your couch or in your basement. I mean, the responsibility, again, comes back to the wealth. The wealthy are the heads of the corporations that have the responsibility to hire these people. The wealthy are these corporations that have the responsibility to not only pay that living wage to the individual, but to provide things they shouldn't have to pay out of their pocket, such as health care. And if they can't, then we, the people, need to pick up the slack through the government. And I'm not a proponent, I'm not an advocate of Medicare for all, so I'm glad we didn't
I'm not going to accuse you.
Continue on that. So those are just some of the things that I would say to that. It does come back to the wealthy. And does the wealth tax make that all better? No, no one policy makes anything all better. It's much more complicated than that, much more multifaceted approach to solutions to some of the things that ail our nation that he mentioned, and I agree with some of those ailments. But the solution to it is different.
Let me just say, you did say something in there I really disagree with. In specific instances, Scarelli with that drug that he did, the 4,000, that's criminal and just should be stopped. But the wealth are not our problem. Well, the wealthy people are not the people with the 71 billion and keeping the poor people down. That's not what's happening. Wealthy people are just as nice and just as good as poor people. They really, really are. You take your patriotic millionaires or billionaires, whatever your group is there, they have the right to give their money. They've earned it. They have the right to give their money to you, to liberal causes and all that, and they do. Tom Steyer, ran for president on it. and I don't begrudge him that. He has that right, and George Soros does all that too, but so do other people, right? It's their money, and they use it. Most of these people give away a lot of money in charity and stuff, but if you had a low-rate, broad-based, flat tax, then you could get a system that really does bring the poor back into the system. You've got to be able to handle welfare, Leslie, where if people start working and they start losing their welfare benefits, that is effectively a tax on them. There are two areas in America which used to have the highest tax. This is pre-Reagan. Two areas. The very, very poor have tax rates in the 90-95% range because of welfare cutoffs, and the highest income groups had it before Reagan. What we tried to do with welfare reform, and we tried to do with enterprise zones, was to get rid of lower both of those tax rates, the poor and the rich, to create a broad-based flat tax for economic growth and prosperity. My view there, you've got to get the bad ones, whether they're rich or poor. Anyone who breaks the law and exploits other people should not be allowed to do that. But let rich people have it. The dream in America has never been to make the rich poor. The dream in America is to make the poor richer, to give them that opportunity to be successful. And that's what I want to make sure we don't destroy in this wonderful country of ours. And that's why I moved to Tennessee. In Tennessee, earning income is a lot more fun with lower taxes. Let me just tell you.
Let me say that these two debaters have been covering a lot of the questions that the audience members have submitted. And so I don't want to interrupt, when we've really got them going, you just let them go, right? They've been doing a great job covering a lot of territory, and a lot of our audience questions actually deal with these questions about the least of these in our society, the people who are at the lowest level of income. And so I'm glad to hear part of that discussion. Here's a question related to that from an audience member. Is income inequality or economic mobility a better measure of the state of the economy for the average person? Everyone talks about inequality, which may be driven by positive developments such as increasing college enrollment and increasing life expectancy. What is happening with economic mobility? And so I think this question gets to sort of asking about the premise of using income inequality as our metric. Dr. Laffer?
I'll start if you want. Leslie, you want to go? Or?
No, you can start.
Okay. I like income equality. I like more equal income when everyone's better off and the poor are getting better off faster than the rich are getting better off. I think that's a wonderful way of reducing income inequality. But when reducing income inequality is when the rich are getting poorer faster than the poor are getting poorer, it's really, really wrong. Now, let me just take you to Saez's famous curve. If you know, he has the income inequality, the top 1%, how much of total income they have, and if you know, it goes from the 20s way up here, right down in the 30s, throughout the 40s, and then starts rising, and Reagan, it goes way back up. If you look at the standard of living in those areas, when the tax rates went up, all right, it is true, income equality became much better, much closer in those periods with the high tax rates. But the reason it became closer is because we had a depression, because the standard of living fell so much, and it fell so much amongst the rich. The threshold, which Saez and Piketty and Zuckman never mentioned, the threshold income to be in the top 1% was cut by more than 50% going into the 30s and 40s. The poor, the minorities, the disenfranchised were devastated, but income was more equal. That's not what you want. The dream is always to make the poor richer. To make the poor richer, not the poor poorer, only less poor than the rich are getting poorer. And if you look at this, it's really true. We had a couple of periods during the very high tax rates where we had a very big growth in economics. Jack Kennedy Kennedy cut the highest marginal income tax rate in America from 91% to 70%. He cut the lowest rate from 20% to 14%. He cut the corporate rate from 52 to 48%, against the wishes of Barry Goldwater and the Republicans, by the way. He wanted to cut it much more. He put in the investment tax credit in the U.S. He shortened depreciable lives for plant and equipment expenditures to cut taxes on business, to increase the incentive to invest, to grow. He cut taxes on traded products. It was called the Kennedy Round Tariff Negotiation. He cut tariffs by 35%, free trade. And what happened to the 60s? It's called the go-go 60s. The economy grew at over 5% per annum like never before. Not only did it grow at over 5%, but we moved from a deficit to a surplus in the budget. And they all attributed that growth and that surplus to cutting tax rates, not raising tax rates. And then we go into the Four Stooges, which you'll forgive me, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter, which is the largest assemblage of bipartisan ignorance ever put on planet Earth. The Four Stooges, and they ruined it all. But then we came to, be still my heart, Ronnie. Thank you. Then what did we do there? We created this enormous prosperity all the way through Clinton. Now, you may know I'm a Kennedy Democrat, Massachusetts Kennedy Democrat. I'm a Reagan Republican. I'm a Clinton Democrat. I voted for Clinton twice. I thought he was great. He did not like me, by the way, but I loved him. He did it great. He cut government spending as a share of GDP by more than the next four best peacetime presidents combined. I mean, by 3.5 percentage points. He got rid of the retirement test on Social Security, had welfare reform. They actually have to look for a job to get welfare. Oh, how unfair is that? I mean, if you look at him, he cut the capital gains tax rate from 28% to 20%. I mean, he was amazing. And he was one of the best presidents ever on economics. I just want you to know my daughter would not intern in that White House, just so you know. But just joking. I'm having some, please giggle a little bit. But, it's not Republican or Democrat. It's not liberal or conservative. It's pro-growth economics. And you can't tax a society into prosperity. It's as simple as that. A poor person cannot spend himself into wealth. It doesn't happen. You've got to earn yourself into wealth. You've got to cut taxes and economic incentives, allow people to really do as much as they can for themselves, and then, with a warm heart and a clear eye, make sure you help those the most disadvantaged. We're not a society that will let people die on the streets, and that it's just wrong. But always remember the consequences of redistribution, so you always are clear-eyed and understand what the costs are of putting in a redistribution program when you do it, so you can match the benefits down here with the cost to society in total. And that's what you want to do. A flat tax does exactly that.
So to play advocate for the audience questioner who asked about economic mobility, what is going on with economic mobility in America today? Because I believe, and Ms. Marshall, I'd love to hear from you on this, because I think in your opening remarks you mentioned that it's hard for the middle class to provide for themselves today. And I want to hear from both panelists if they believe that the American dream or economic mobility is still possible. Because I think that that's truly, if I can interject my opinion here, I think that's behind a lot of support for increased taxation is concern about economic mobility, or what I call the American dream. So, Ms. Marshall, is the American dream dead?
Well, a couple of things. First, you had me at best president ever. I know you said economically, he is my favorite president, so I did like that.
It's true.
Look, the reason the wealth tax is so popular across the board, whether it's region, it's race, or it's political ideology, is because of the time we're living in. And I'm not talking about the COVID-19 pandemic time that we're living in. I'm talking about the erosion of the middle class. The working class of this nation is what made this nation what it is, and there's a very big concern that we will have no middle class someday, and nobody wants to lose their head literally, as we saw the French do many years ago. We have to look at the realities of where we are right now and why income inequality is so relevant. In the past two midterm elections, if you look at exit polls, that was very high on voters' agenda, and not just on Democrats. And that's how a lot of Democrats, Connor Lamb is an example of that, were able to win seats in very red districts, even districts that voted for Trump in 2016, but they went for a Democrat in the House because they felt that they were going to provide measures that would offset the disparity in income and attribute to the income inequality in our nation. Income inequality in the United States is the highest of all the G7 nations. And the black-white income gap in the United States has persisted over time. When you look at polls, 61% of Americans say there is too much economic inequality in the country today, and the wealth gap between America's richest and poorest families more than doubled between 1989 and 2016. And if you go 2018, 20% of families made more than half of all U.S. income, but middle-class incomes have grown at a slower rate than upper-tier incomes over the past 5 decades. So here's the thing. He said we need to make the poor richer. I agree with that 100%. The problem is that is not being done. It's not being done now. It hasn't been done. So all of these ideas and all of these policies have failed in doing that. So why shouldn't we look at something different? You know, if you know, and some people say try to reinvent the wheel. Are we? Or are we redistributing the wealth? And if we redistribute the wealth with the wealth tax, and the reason that is so popular because, one, it hasn't been tried. 2, it makes sense to a lot of people who worry about further income inequalities and erosion of the middle class. And 3, they're not seeing their wages rise. They're not seeing the opportunities that they think that they should have. And of course they see the lack of fairness when you talk about all of the deductions and the loopholes that the rich clearly benefit from and that the rest of us who are middle class or lower income cannot benefit from and don't have the money to hire brilliant accountants to hide money. And not wealth, to hide money. So isn't their income plus everything else they have, their wealth entirely, part of what makes them rich, and therefore shouldn't they be paying on that entire sum and not just their income, which is what the wealth tax proposes.
We have many more audience questions to get to. I'd like to get to at least one more topic before I give our post-debate poll. So if you can, audience members, both those of you who joined us in person and those who are joining us virtually, take an opportunity to answer the post-debate poll so that we can gauge whether there was any movement and any opinions tonight. We had several audience questions about government spending. And so, Jennifer, I suggest that we have another debate to follow up and cover government spending as its own topic. But we had several questions about whether the government spends money efficiently. And one question that speaks to me because I'm concerned about the national debt, and this is maybe where government taxation and government spending levels do have some relationship or intersection or relationship is in the national deficits. And we're running quite high deficits in a time of COVID stimulus. And so I want to ask you, Dr. Laffer, I've heard it suggested that if you are concerned about the national debt, if you're concerned about the national deficits, then you ought to support higher taxation. Is that true in your opinion, or what do you think we should do to reduce the federal debt?
Let me just say that even though I do support Trump, I don't support the CARES Act. I think a lot of it was very good, the money for medicine and all that, and some of the PPP was all right, but very frankly, it was a huge boondoggle. $3.6 trillion really goes a long way. I did a study with John Childs about 6 years ago, and what I did was I looked at the total cost of collecting a dollar that can be spent by government. We looked at the total out-of-pocket costs of collecting a dollar. You have your accountants, your deferred income specialists, you have your tax people, all of that there. You have all of these, you have your audit fees, et cetera. Then you have the whole IRS, which is a huge cost. What we found is that for every dollar the government spends, it costs out-of-pocket about 32 cents to do that. So you've got a very inefficient system collecting the money and actually spending it, in my mind. So the more you can allow the market to collect and do, the better off you are in this process. So that's where I'd go. The debt, I don't want to support modern monetary theory. I really don't. But they do have a good point, is the cost of additional debt has been greatly exaggerated in economics over many, many years. If you look at $1 trillion and what its total cost is, you don't look at $1 trillion relative to GDP. That's comparing a stock with a flow. GDP is a flow, debt is a stock. What you want to look at is compare debt to wealth, or you want to compare debt service to GDP. Now, when you have interest rates in the range of, let's say, 1 or 2%, you've got every $1 trillion, you've got, what is it, 10 billion is the cost. 10 billion as a share of GDP is not a huge number. It's not pushing us. It's bad. It will hurt the economy, but it's not something to get panicked about and jump off the cliff and jump over the window. It's not. So when you look at debt, if I were to suggest to anyone here is take a deep breath, take a brown paper bag, take a lewd, cool down. The debt is a very serious problem, but it's a very long-term problem. What you want to do is collect more taxes, obviously, but the way you collect taxes is through prosperity. You reduce spending because of prosperity, and you collect more tax revenues, and over time your growth will bring that debt down to a much lower level relative to GDP, debt service, or relative to U.S. wealth. But we have a debt problem that has started in 2008 and come through now. It's very high. I hope they don't do another stimulus, but in the long run, you cannot solve your debt problem by raising taxes and causing people to be unemployed and lose their incomes and need more help from the government.
Do we have time for one more question? Okay, great. I have a question that's directed to you, Ms. Marshall, and it's about the flat tax. And the question from the audience is, why would it not be fair? How is it not fair for everyone to pay a flat tax rate? In this system, isn't it true that the rich do pay more?
Well, actually, no. It depends when you're looking at the rich. In the 1950s and 60s, the economy was booming, and the wealthiest Americans at that time paid a top income tax rate of 91%. What percentage do you think the top rate is today? 43%. The rich are truly getting richer. The middle class are not getting richer. Their wages are not increasing. Their wages have been stagnant. And we have wealthy Americans who often want to cut programs that help lower income Americans, whether it be programs they're on right now like WICA, food stamps, welfare, and the list goes on. Look, you can't treat somebody on the bottom the same as the top. You can't, whether it's financially or otherwise. Look, somebody who is extremely wealthy, their child is going to have a very different opportunity when it comes to education, right? You know, people, you know, always talk about, have you ever been to inner city schools? You know, versus like, I live in California, I live in Southern California, I live in Los Angeles, right? And if you go to schools in South Central, Watts, Compton, versus Beverly Hills, Bel Air, they're public schools. But in those other schools, they have to have their parents buy them supplies that aren't provided by the school. And everyone in the state of California is paying taxes and paying into that public school system. You don't have the opportunities. The rich people have these opportunities that the poor people don't. So when people say, oh, if you just have a flat tax, no offense, Steve Forbes in the green room of Fox talked my ear off about the flat tax. but it's not as cut and dry as he says. And there are many economists that have spoken out against it because of that, because it's not as cut and dry. It doesn't have to do in this nation with just money. And if it did have to do with just money, well, maybe the flat tax would make some sense. But if you're looking at, if you have a flat tax, there is still going to be people that are going to be able to hide income, because that tax is going to be on their income. It's not looking at the wealth overall of the wealthy, of that top 1 or 2% of our nation and the wealthiest among them. And the poorer people aren't going to be helped by a flat tax. And the flat tax isn't going to take them out of the predicament they're in. Like I said, it's a multifaceted approach with which I believe the wealth tax is a beginning. It's not the middle and the end by any means, but it's a beginning where we redistribute that wealth, we can address the income inequality. And I know what you were saying regarding the flat tax, but I just don't see it addressing the income inequality because the wealthy are still getting wealthier.
Well, to Ms. Marshall's point, we did get an audience question, and I want you to respond because it's a challenge to the flat tax. Would a flat tax system not represent a big tax increase for the lowest earners? To you, Dr. Laffer.
Yeah, let me if I can do Leslie's too.
Of course.
I agree on the 91%, but you know, your favorite president, mine too, John F. Kennedy, thought that was a very unfair tax. He cut it from 91% to 70%. He cut the corporate rate from 52% to 48%. He tried to cut it much lower. I told you all about the tax cuts. We had this huge prosperity called the Go-Go 60s, went into surplus, poverty diminished in America. That was John F. Kennedy. In 1986, we had my tied for favorite president on earth, a guy named Ronald Reagan. We had a bill in 1986. Now think of this today. We cut the highest marginal income tax rate from 50% to 28%. Is that a good enough cut for you? Really feeding those ultra fat cat richies? We not only did that, but we reduced the number of brackets, I think, from 11 brackets to 2. There were 2 tax brackets, 28% and 15%. That's it, no other complications. Coming darn close to a flat tax. And number 3, what we did was we cut the corporate rate from 46% to 34%. Really a fat cat richie bill. You with me? The vote in the U.S. Senate. In 1986, in favor of this bill, it passed. The vote was a very close vote, 97-3. Only 3 Democrats voted against it. All right, the 3 Democrats were Levin, Simon, that little bow tie, and Merkley were the 3 did. And all the other ones, Al Gore, Bill Bradley, Teddy Kennedy, all the Californians voted for it, and 1 other senator voted for it at the time too, and I laud him for it, and I really, really do. Mr. Joe Biden voted to cut the highest rate from 50% to 28% and bragged about how this would lead to prosperity in America, and he was right. You know, it's a bipartisan thing. Economics is not all that complicated. You know, the hubris of these politicians thinking that they can engineer a program is just beyond the pale. You want to get it low rate and then get the hell out. And
I lived in Houston, Texas in the early 90s for 5 months. And I remember going to an area of town, and some of the people I worked with, and they were Republicans, said to me, oh, we're just going to drive through here to go to another area because, you know, this place was booming. And I said, what happened? And they said, well, during the Reagan years, the first 4 years were great. It was the last 4 that weren't. And that all of this oil money and all of this rich trickle-down effect didn't end up benefiting the people in that community at the end of the day.
We are out of time, so we're going to move to the closing statements. If you'd like to address that in your closing statement, Dr. Laffer, feel free to do so. We'll start with Dr. Laffer for the closing statements.
Yeah, I just want to go on the politics a little bit, which you started off with, Leslie, and I don't want to. Jerry Brown in 1992, there were 8 candidates in the race. Jerry Brown was 8th of the 8 candidates. He'd made a promise that he wouldn't accept any contributions over $100. When he got into the flat tax there, he went from 8th in the race to 2nd in the race. He got the 2nd most number of delegates in the convention there. Even in the Democratic primary, the flat tax is really popular. And he would have won the race, I believe, if he had really pushed on hard. The 86 Tax Act is the other one I'd like to just stress. And the reason these guys voted for it is they know it's the right thing to do, Leslie. I just want to come back. Reagan, oh, please, you know, please, don't cross the, but I mean, prosperity is not easy to get. And it's very difficult to have it administered from the top. We want a tax system that's fair and voluntary to the largest extent we can have it voluntary.
I wrote mine, sorry. How much time do I have?
3 minutes.
Okay, so the tax system is not progressive, and progressive is not a dirty word, neither is liberal. Liberal means generous, by the way. Tax system is not progressive when it comes to the wealthy. The richest 1% pay an effective federal income tax rate of 24.7%, and that is a little more than the 19.3% rate paid by someone making an average of $75,000 a year. 1 out of 5 millionaires pays a lower rate than someone making $50,000 to $100,000 a year. So the ultra-rich have an unfair advantage with the many loopholes in the tax code, and who picks up the tab? The rest of us do. Instead of cutting education funding for our children, we should ask millionaires to pay a tax rate at least as high as their secretaries. Instead of cutting Social Security and Medicare, we should ask the wealthy to give up a few tax loopholes so they can make sure that everyone has a secure retirement and not just them and their children and their grandchildren. Conservatives claim the wealthy are overtaxed, but The richest pay 1%, the richest 1%, pay an effective federal income tax rate, like I said, of 24.7%. So we could slow the ballooning imbalance in the structure of the U.S. tax system with the wealth tax, and moreover, making these adjustments could lead to a more inclusive economy in the long run, especially if the revenues are invested in areas such as education, infrastructure, which is badly needed and has bipartisan support, and scientific research with COVID badly needed. To the extent that the revenues from a wealth tax are used to improve opportunities for others through public investments such as education, healthcare, childcare, and paid leave, the tax would help make the prosperous U.S. economy more inclusive. I told you the Pope is with me on this. The wealth tax isn't just about righting the wrongs of income inequality. It is also, as I said, righting the wrongs of political power and the inequality that comes with that. The power belongs politically in the hands of the people. That's where it belongs, the majority of the voters, the middle class. That's fair, and that's the right thing to do. So ask yourself at the end of the day, it's not, do you like Leslie better than Doctor or vice versa? It isn't just about the wealth tax. It is, do you as an American, do you as a human being, do you want to do what is moral, what is right, and what is fair? And if so, then you need to favor the wealth tax and move the dial on that poll.
You campaigned.
I'm not even running.
There you go.
I'm not even running.
I think we found more areas of agreement tonight than I expected, but I certainly learned a lot, so please join me in thanking our debaters.
You were great, by the way.
So were you.
Thank you.
All right. And I do have updated poll results.
Okay.
The first poll question in our post-debate poll, did either of our speakers change your mind about the wealth tax? 51% answered yes. And
that's a majority.
Yes, it is. And 49% answered no. And then the second question, if you have changed your mind, are you, and the answer options are more in favor or less in favor of a wealth tax. And 25% of respondents said they are more in favor of a wealth tax. 75% said they are less in favor of a wealth tax. And we had some additional responses and comments, but thank you so much for all of your contributions, audience members, in terms of the questions. We had a lot of excellent questions, excellent discussion. Thank you for your feedback, and thank you to our hosts tonight, MTSU, and to the Steamboat Institute for hosting a wonderful debate.
Dr. Laffer and Hadley, Heath, Manning. It's hard to get on a debate stage. This is a hard thing to do, and let's hear another round of applause for these brave individuals who got up here. Very quickly, I just want one more minute of your time. Huge thanks to Dr. Dan Smith and the Political Economy Research Institute here at Middle Tennessee State University for hosting us. We hope we will be invited back to your campus. Please be sure to respond to our post-event survey, which will take about 3 minutes. You should have received an email just a few minutes ago. Only takes 3 minutes. We'd love to have your feedback on this debate and future debates that you might like to see us do. This debate video will also be available on Steamboat Institute's YouTube channel and Facebook page. After the event, it'll be available in the coming days and weeks at any time you want to access it. Please share it with your networks. If you enjoyed this evening's debate and would like to help the Steamboat Institute in restoring civilized debate and discourse to college campuses across America, you may make a 100% tax-deductible contribution at steamboatinstitute.org, or you can text Steamboat Freedom to 22525. Thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to come and hear this important debate. Thank you again to our debaters. Have a wonderful evening.
You were great. I actually.
How did it go? Is it okay?